Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. We'll give folks a couple of minutes as people start to join, but I'm really looking forward to today's conversation, and I'm so happy to have you all here. As people start to join and as we warm up, pop into the chat where you're joining from. It's always interesting to see where folks are joining from. I am in Brooklyn, New York. Very, very grateful for some slightly warmer temperature after a few weeks of pretty brutal cold. I don't know if anybody else is in the East Coast, but it has been really across the states pretty brutally cold. So happy to finally be coming out of that, it seems. Um, and so Today, we're going to be digging into new research connecting healthy buildings with both financial and health outcomes. We'll be honing in on several studies that were led by our guest, Dr. Franz Fuerst, who I'll be introducing fully shortly. So very much looking forward to hearing his perspective. And thank you all for sharing where you're from. We have kind of all across the states so far. Jealous that 67 degrees Fahrenheit is chilly in Tampa. But happy to have you here, Jason. Oh my goodness, in Canada. So we have definitely a full spectrum of temperatures. Perfect. So hopefully everyone can see my slide deck. Let me know if you can't. But I'm going to keep advancing those. So to kick us off, I just want to quickly run through today's agenda. We'll start with introductions and a brief overview and refresher of the Center for Active Design's approach and our origin as an organization. We'll also cover a few current trends we're seeing when it comes to the impact of prioritizing health in the built environment. We'll then dive into a presentation from Dr. Fuerst, who will share insights from several new studies evaluating the power of healthy buildings. And the first study has been fully released with the following two, while the following two are in progress. So this will be a special first glimpse at the initial findings from Dr. Fuerst's team, which is exciting. We'll follow with a discussion to dig a bit deeper and wrap up for some time for some Q&A from you all. So if you have any questions throughout as we're going through the content, please pop those into the Q&A. You may, there are a bunch of different options in Zoom, so you may need to go to more to see the Q&A and access that. But so send those in and we'll answer all of those or as many as possible during the Q&A section at the end of our session. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Franz Fuerst, who's professor of real estate and urban economics at the University of Cambridge and Trinity Hall. He's also a J.M. Keynes Fellow and a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. His research focuses on sustainable real estate, health and well-being in the built environment, as well as spatial economics. He's authored award-winning studies on environmental and financial performance in international real estate markets. Franz has held visiting posts in Melbourne, Tokyo, and Munich, and serves as co-editor of the Spatial Economic Analysis. He leads multiple research projects and advises government businesses and industry associations. A really big thank you to Dr. Fuerst for joining today's webinar. And excited to hear his perspectives on all of these areas and how they relate to our work at the Center for Active Design and through Fitwell. And for those joining today who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Sara Karerat. I've worked with the Center for Active Design for the past 8 years, and I currently serve as the managing director leading the organization's programming. Over the past several years, our team at the Center for Active Design has been especially focused on exploring the impact of health promoting spaces and places from both a health promotion perspective and as well as an economic one. I'm deeply passionate about creating actionable and impactful evidence-based frameworks that can drive change to create a stronger built environment for everyone. And this is why I'm really looking forward to today's conversation where we'll dig into some new research that can help inform our field. And in the chat, my colleague is going to pop into in there a link to one of the studies that we'll be talking about, the one that is publicly available currently. Now, just for a bit of background on our organization, for those who may be new to us, CFAD, our nonprofit, which is focused on translating public health research into actionable solutions for the real estate sector, grew out of a long legacy of leveraging the built environment to promote health in New York City. From urban design tactics, such as the opening of Central Park, which was designed to promote, to provide the everyman with access to fresh air and a green space to socialize and engage in physical activity, to legislation, including the Tenement Act, which sets standards to improve water and indoor air quality in housing. Our cities have long been a testament to the power of design and operations to support positive health and economic outcomes. In 2010, the Bloomberg administration released the active design guidelines, showing not only how the built environment could be leveraged to promote physical activity, but also attract top talent to New York City, boosting the business case bottom line. A few years later, the Center for Active Design was created to help scale the efforts began by the Bloomberg administration. And since then, CFAD has formalized this approach to translating research into practical tactics to shape the built environment, really operationalized within the Fitwel standard that many of you all use. And so here are just a few examples of our work at the Center for Active Design, and it really highlights sort of the scope of what we focus on in different ways. We've applied our approach of leveraging research to drive market transformation in pursuit of the ultimate goal of a healthier built environment. And as shown on this slide, in sort of the last bottom right image, 15 years after the original active design guidelines was released, New York City, in collaboration with the Center for Active Design, recently at the end of last year launched ADG 2.0. And this publication really expands the focus to address how the built environment can address holistic health. So rather than fully focusing and only focusing on physical activity, it's really been broadened to focus on mental, physical, and social well-being. This new playbook also highlights how our places and spaces are really vital assets in addressing some of today's most pressing concerns, including climate change and health disparities. And you can access the full publication on our website at centerforactivedesign.org. And I believe my colleague is going to pop a link into the chat so that everyone can see where to find that. And so today, I'm really looking forward to hearing Dr. Fuerst also dig into the economic benefits of prioritizing people in building operations and design. We are at a really pivotal moment within the real estate industry where we're seeing investors and tenants demanding more than just simply space, but really looking at what those spaces are providing and demanding that there is this environment that is aimed at promoting wellness and well-being. Research has shown how healthy building certifications and the attributes of health promoting buildings have been shown to correlate with financial benefits, including ROI, net operating income, and tenant satisfaction. According to research and exploration from the Global Wellness Institute, the wellness real estate market is growing at 15.8% annually, projected to reach 912.6 billion by 2028. So really significant, sort of seeing that growth over the past several years, really ramping up around COVID. And we see this as a notable market shift and the future of the real estate industry rather than simply a trend. We're seeing that healthy spaces again and again are outperforming traditional real estate, and seeing that from a number of different outlets and a number of different research perspectives. In addition, a trend that we've seen really ramp up over the past few years is this awareness among tenants and demand among tenants for health promoting spaces. We see research indicating that 71% of residents value healthy building features in their apartment communities. So we'll be getting a little bit into, we're going to be looking at research that focuses on office and then other research that focuses on the housing sector. So we'll look at sort of what the impact of these different contexts and typologies looks like. 75% of employees now expect their workplaces to support health and well-being in some way, and 94% of investors report tenant demand for healthy buildings. So we are sort of across the different perspectives across the board, seeing that there is this growing demand for health within the spaces that we occupy. These numbers indicate that health promotion has become more of a baseline expectation, which opens up an opportunity for the real estate sector to transform how we design, build, and operate space, turning buildings into platforms for human health and performance, which is really exciting for us at the Center for Active Design, as we're really passionate about this intersection between public health and the built environment. With that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Dr. Franz Fuerst, who will dig into a few new studies that highlight the diverse values associated with healthy buildings.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks also to the center and Fitwell for giving me an opportunity to present this research, and really thanks for fostering the dialogue between academia, business, and all kinds of stakeholders here. And there are quite a few, and I hope our discussion can also get into the multifaceted nature of interest alignment that is at stake here. But let's take it in turn. So first of all, as Sarah has said, I would like to talk about a study that's been published in the Journal of Environmental Management. It's open access. A link will be provided so you can all access it. It's not paywalled, and you can look at the details. Obviously, I'll only be able to scratch the surface in what I'm going to present here in terms of the all the checks that need to go into making sure that the results that we find are actually valid. So next slide, please. So I don't think I need to uh, talk a lot about the motivation for healthy building to this audience, but just as maybe a refresher, the 330-300 rule of thumb that a lot of you will be aware of. So just to kind of illustrate the the magnitude of potential for a healthy building case there is. And we always compare healthy buildings to green build or energy efficient buildings because the latter have a longer history, admittedly. And so we're doing a lot of comparing and contrasting to green buildings, not just in terms of certification schemes, but also in general, in terms of the genesis of the two movements that are also closely interlinked in a way. So the 330-300 rule is simply for every $3 spent on utilities, a typical company will spend $30 on rents, 300 on employee salaries. So assuming that the health benefits are a smaller percentage than they were on energy efficiency upgrades, it would still make a much bigger impact in terms of the absolute value because the lever of the employee salaries, the human resources, and the health is just so much larger than it is on utilities. That's not to say that utilities don't matter, not by any means. If we take climate change and environmental challenges seriously, we should care about all of them. But just in terms of why this matters, it maybe also a first answer towards why now? Why have we been kind of oblivious of healthy buildings for such a long time? Well, because that those benefits are more intangible. And I think as we get more data, we also dig more deeply into the measurability, which has eluded us for a very long time. So finally, we're now able to actually operationalize those fuzzy benefits a lot better. I think in anticipation of maybe some questions there will be on that. Okay, but I think that's all I'll say to that. And then let's delve right into our actual study. This is just the cover sheet. I mentioned it already. So next slide. So the research questions that Katarina Minko, my co-author, and I were interested in were, first of all, do health certified, so well and Fitwell certified office assets actually command a rental premium? And then secondly, um, how does this relate to outdoor health factors? And one of the main indicators that we looked at was outdoor air quality. What we wanted to achieve there was not just a simple rental premium study, but we wanted to take a more holistic 360-degree view on what actually constitutes a healthy building, not just the indoor environment, but outdoors as well, including the location. Also to control for possible confounders there if you focus too narrowly just on the indoors. That's also the reason why we included data on walkability of a neighborhood and also on healthcare provision at the local scale. So the contribution that we were seeking here is one of the first econometric studies of economic value of health and well-being certification schemes. And as I said, comparing the relative strengths of the impact of indoor and outdoor health-related indicators on economic variables, financial variables, primarily rent in our study. Next slide, please. So speaking of air quality, and I won't go into this, but what we spent actually a lot of time on is the measurement and merging of air quality. Obviously, we didn't measure air quality ourselves across the US. That would have taken us a lifetime with a team of 2 people. And there is good data by the EPA already. The challenge was that the monitoring stations can be or are typically located at a distance from the actual office buildings. And how do you then calculate an outdoor air quality index for each building? So that was the challenge. But we put together all the different information points, as you can see here in this illustration, and then applied an inverse distance weighting to each of them. Also broken down by individual pollutants, based on the fact that some of these pollutants, like particulate matter, for example, they travel more slowly across distance than other types of pollutants. But eventually, we calculated an AQI value for each office building across the 12 office markets that we covered in the study. Next slide, please. So yeah, same with walk score. We didn't calculate a walk score ourselves, so that's something that is available. It's proprietary data, which we bought and then fed into our database and used for modeling. So to answer the question that we posed initially, how is walkability related to rents? Above and beyond just accessibility. The two concepts are obviously related, but they're different. So as you can see here with the 3 examples, New York, Denver, and Atlanta, all 3 of them, especially in the central business districts, they have excellent accessibility, but I think nobody would doubt that a place like Manhattan is more walkable than some other downtowns in US metro areas. So there's quite a distinction there. It's more fine-grained. But so walkability is also something that we looked at. Okay, so this is just underlining what Sarah said earlier about the nearly exponential growth of certifications over time. That's also reflected in the database that we are using, and that's always also a sanity check for us if the subsample, which is not 100% of certified buildings, but a subset thereof, that it aligns with the data that we see for the entire kind of population of buildings. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is maybe a bit overwhelming to those of you who aren't familiar with reading regression tables. So please bear with me, but I promise you I'm going to walk you through everything carefully. So what we have here is as a dependent variable, so our outcome variable, as it says here, is rent levels measured by real estate providers and collected by real estate analytics firms such as Comstack, CoStar. And then we want to measure the impact of each of these factors that are listed here. And our variables of interest are highlighted here in blue and green also. And they show us, first of all, the direction of the impact. So does it have a negative sign, a positive sign? It shows us the magnitude, and it also shows us the significance levels. And as you can see here at the bottom, The more stars there are, the better it is, the higher it is in terms of statistical significance. So that's the basic setup of these what's called hedonic models. Then we have four different estimations here, and you will notice they start with either FE or RE. That's kind of econometrics jargon for fixed effects and random effects. I won't go into the details of the pros and cons of each of those, but the random effects models, the 2A and 2B, are probably more accurate in what we're looking for because they don't treat the 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 factors that are not time varying. So for example, size, number of floors, what building class it is, they don't treat it, they don't drop out in a random effects estimation. So that's why let's look at straight at the model estimates from 2A and 2B. And they are not too dissimilar between FE and RE estimates, so that's also reassuring. But what we see here is that health being certified as a healthy building commands a clear and significant rental premium. So, and that's controlling for age, renovation, size, number of floors, building class. Some markets, we also have another accessibility metric, which is the amount of office space in I believe it's a mile radius within, so not just within a submarket, but generally. So we also control for the density, and we also control for economic conditions, local economic conditions, and we proxy that with the unemployment rate. So what we do find, as I said, is a health certification premium. What was slightly puzzling was the negative sign on green buildings. And yeah, we have several ideas of why that might be. Again, don't have time really to get into it now. If there is anything in the Q&A, happy to discuss that. Maybe the other thing that I should mention is the difference between the A and B models here, the full sample versus the PSM, where PSM stands for propensity score matching. So propensity score matching is essentially, if you imagine you use a full sample where you have some certified buildings, but the overwhelming majority of comparison buildings is not health certified, right? So for the PSM, you actually cut down that comparison sample to buildings that are very, very similar to the certified buildings, much more similar than the overall population of buildings. And that gives you less variation, and it gives you maybe better comparison in terms of comparing two sets of buildings that are very similar in all aspects apart from health certification. So next slide, please. So this is again very similar, uh, but more detailed model results, and it brings in the information that I just talked about the outdoor factors. So it also breaks it down between different types of certification schemes, the standard certificates and the COVID certificates. It also differentiates well and fit well, and the respective loadings of those. Another surprising finding that we had was on air quality. So when we first ran the models, we expected, our prior expectation was bad outdoor air quality will decrease rents, right? It would make sense. But what we're actually seeing is the opposite. So lower air quality. So the AQI, the way it's scaled is actually a higher value of AQI means worse air quality and vice versa. So a low number is good, but it's positively associated. And we were really scratching our heads and thinking about why that might be. And we lost a little bit confidence in our ability to control for correlated factors, such as controlling for location. So that would be the first thing that comes to mind, right? It's obviously if the air quality in CBDs is bad, is terrible, then but that's where the highest rents are paid. But it can't be that because remember we're also controlling for these factors very carefully. So we have sub-market controls, we have square footage in the immediate vicinity, and so on and so forth. So it's really yeah, open to discussion, I would say. One possible explanation is that in office buildings, I mean, we always say we spend 90% of our time indoors, so maybe the indoor air quality matters a lot more. Although that's not something we've looked at directly yet because we didn't have in-depth data on indoor air quality. It would be interesting to actually look at the difference between outdoor air quality, indoor air quality for each building separately. But yeah, getting into future research here. But what we also see then moving down the list is that distance to nearest hospital is is has the expected effect, and then some moderate effect also on the hospital rating, but it's not as clear cut as we would have imagined in terms of our prior expectations. What is significant though is the active commuting score. So the active commuting score is a subscore of the walk score, and it comprises well, as the name suggests, active, so walking, cycling. So it's a compound measure of active commuting and more comprehensive than just looking at either walking, cycling, or other active commuting. So that's also positively related to rents, but with a smaller effect in terms of the coefficient that we see. And again, as I said, the green building certification being negative here, but not confirmed in the PSM on the right-hand side, which is the 4-beam model. But overall, as you can see, it's quite a large sample. So in the full sample, we have 171,000 observations. So across 12 markets in the US, so covering really a broad range of markets and different types of buildings and different segments also. All of them office buildings, obviously. Okay, so next slide, please. So the key takeaways, just to wrap up the overview of this study, is that we do find that healthy building certification is associated with a significant rental premium, and we're pretty confident that this is not an artifact of what we're looking at in terms of a sample that is not valid in a broader or more robust sense, but we've tested it significantly with or extensively, I should say, with different model specifications, different variables that are included, excluded, different econometric techniques for estimation, but it always came out significant. So we're pretty confident that there is something there. Obviously, our research has also undergone peer review in the Journal of Environmental Management, and lots of questions were asked by the reviewers that we were very grateful for, and that have also helped us improve the research and refine it over time. So, as I said, the outdoor air quality variable does not appear to affect rents for whatever reason. So that's something we would like to follow up on because it's intriguing as a finding. A distance to nearest hospital is negatively associated with office rents. So in other words, the closer you are, the better it is. But quality rating of nearest hospital does not show the expected sign there. And walkable neighborhoods, again, command a rental premium, even after controlling for submarkets. So that's study one. And if I have a few minutes, I can show you what we're working on at the moment. And this is, unlike the first study, this is still very much work in progress. So the results might still change as we refine this research. So please keep that in mind. But just to give you an idea and a flavor of what we're working on at the moment. So what we found in the first study was that we had all these questions about not just about capitalization into rents and asset values and health certification of being a healthy building, but we also wanted to know how does this actually affect outcomes in terms of people's health and well-being, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the objective, the ultimate objective why healthy buildings exist in the first place and why certification schemes like Fitwel exist, that they want to increase health and well-being in building users and occupiers. So for that, we have a data set that's been around for quite a long time, and that's really useful in tackling these questions, and it's called the EPIC Norfolk study. And yeah, you can see some descriptors there. It's 30,000 people. It was been started in the 1990s and been running ever since. And it's a regular checkup on people's health, diet, lifestyle. Initially, it was mainly survey or questionnaire based, but in later phases, it had a lot of biomarker data, in-depth biomarker data filled in that is really very useful for us. What this database doesn't have is information on buildings or housing. So that's something we had to bring in and merge into the database. And this being highly sensitive medical data and records, obviously you can imagine that there were lots of confidentiality requirements and safeguards in place, and rightly so. That took a long time actually for the two data sets. So the building side of things and the people and medical records side of things to merge together. Okay, next slide, please. So, long story short there, I'll just show you and jump straight into some of our outcomes here. So, this is our our regression table on lung function biomarkers. And what we have here in terms of the model specification, which I didn't show previously, is that we look at house prices, but this time it's an explanatory variable, so it's on the right-hand side. And our outcome are these biomarkers. So these are lung function biomarkers, FEV and PEF, showing how well your lungs work, more or less, to put it simply. So what we do see here is that house prices actually do have a significance in terms of these lung function biomarkers, even controlling for other variables like EPC, which stands for Energy Performance Certificate, and can be seen as a rough proxy for quality in general, although we have to be careful. That is the one that was available to us, but also size, as you can see, then occupation, age, gender, and self-reported housing problems, which we also control for. So what we really wanted to get at is, do house prices and the value of the house actually convey any kind of health benefit that is measurable in those biomarkers? Next slide, please. And we looked at the same for blood lipids and blood sugar, so the TG, triglycerides, and the HbA1c as a longer-term measure of your average blood sugar levels over the last 3 months. And it's the same there as well, where we see a negative association there. So it means the higher those values were in terms of blood lipids and blood sugar, or for those, put differently, the house for house prices, higher house prices means lower values of these triglycerides and blood sugar biomarkers and vice versa, keeping all the other controls in place. So that was an interesting finding that gives us some indication of the relationship between the kind of economic capital and the asset value that people have in their houses above and beyond the immediate environment. There are also longitudinal studies that look at what actually happens when house prices go down or up. The house itself doesn't change, the environment doesn't change, but prices change, your asset values change. And they arrive at similar conclusions, but nobody, to my knowledge, has really looked at that level of depth in terms of the biomarkers. Next slide, please. Okay, so key takeaways here from that study is higher house prices are associated with better health in our regression model, and we find statistical significance for lung function biomarkers, triglycerides, and HbA1c as biomarkers. But one thing that I should stress is, well, I've already said it's work in progress, and the measured effects are really small when all control variables are included. So that's also important to keep in mind and not blow things out of proportion, like high house prices or it can, cure any of those conditions, health conditions that are associated with it, but they may be able to make a small contribution in a positive way. Okay, so finally, moving on to our next slide, and a similar set of questions maybe, but
And
using a
Dr.
much
First,
larger,
I'm just going to
sorry,
quickly interject for
yeah,
this one. If we could do sort of the intro and then the key findings, just so we have enough time for the discussion, that would be perfect.
okay, yeah. So this is a much larger data set, the UK Biobank study, where we look at a larger sample and we have a deeper data set, a larger data set, and we want to know whether, well, whether there are economic stresses, material economic stresses, whether they interact, how housing stress accumulates over time, whether there are critical periods. And we're also interested in nonlinear effects and threshold dynamics, because a lot of these things, they accumulate over a long time, nothing happens, and then all of a sudden there is a rapid deterioration. Okay, so moving on quickly to the next one, and I believe this is already pretty much the only slide that I'm showing here, where we look at CRP, so C-reactive protein, as a proxy for an inflammatory response. And we can then divide up housing stress into percentiles. And we look at each percentile of housing stress, which is made up of a number of different indicators that are underlying that. We see that from the 90th percentile onwards, there is a clear jump, kind of like a hockey stick shape there, where if you're in the top 10% of housing stress, there is kind of a tipping point in terms of the inflammatory response where it kicks in. So even though it also matters in terms of the lower percentiles, it's clearly in the top 10% of housing stress where we see the largest impact there, which has important ramification, I think, for business, but also for government policies potentially. Okay, so yeah, that's, I think, pretty much all I would say. We see that there is clearly cumulative effects there, and also threshold effects that we would like to explore in more depth over the next months or so in this project, and also explore the synergies, and maybe we'll talk about that in the discussion as well, of a triple dividend, where you could have synergies between lowering carbon emissions, lowering energy bills, and at the same time improve population health and resilience. Okay, so thanks, Sarah, and I think we'll leave it at that for now.
Sorry, I was muted. Always has to happen once in a webinar. Thank you so much, Dr. First. Super interesting. And I think that the findings from these studies are profound from a number of different perspectives. One, because it shows, I think in the first study, the significance of addressing health and well-being holistically and how that is has been shown through using the building certifications as a proxy for that, the impact that that can have on the bottom line, looking at rental rates, and then from the kind of health and well-being perspective, how these changes, especially in this last study, where we're looking at the biometric data, really showing how the kind of interventions are having a profound impact when it comes to health and well-being, especially among vulnerable populations. And when we get to that kind of high housing stress level, where the really targeting that population can have such a profound, significant impact. I know at Fitwell, we've always been, and at Center for Active Design, very focused on how can we influence affordable housing and really influence that market to drive change. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to jump into a few questions, and to everyone who's joined us today, thank you for joining, and please continue to pop your questions into the Q&A or the chat. We'll get to them either way, and we'll leave some time at the end to go over those. So, just to kick off sort of the conversation, when we talk about value creation in healthy buildings, curious how you think we should think about the split between real estate asset value versus tenant value. So, obviously, within the real estate sector, there are multiple different stakeholder groups that are really impacted by the intervention, one being the investors, the developers, the owners, and then the other being the tenant and the resident or the employee. And curious in your work how you sort of distinguish between those two stakeholder groups, and if we're seeing both sides of this equation reflected in the research, or if there are any gaps.
Yeah, excellent question. And I think a very pertinent one, and a very pertinent lesson that came out of the green building research that's been going on for a long time, in terms of the split incentive problem, that can really hold back a green building business case when those incentives are in fact split. So it's crucial actually to get that right. And also something that we're looking at in terms of a framework and a theoretical explanation from using game theory, for example. But more practically speaking, you can think of it in terms of if there is a $100 benefit, let's say, from being health certified. Is all of that going to be absorbed by the landlord, the investor, or is there actually some surplus that also accrues to the tenant? And I think what's crucial here is that it's not completely absorbed, but that you create win-win situation, or actually win-win-win situations, taking into account that a tenant usually, especially in an office building, has employees. So you have these three, at least three, stakeholder groups. So the building owner, the tenant, and the tenant's employees. So, and then you can actually break it down into the different types of benefits and the time horizon of those. So you could say that if the $100 benefit can be split up, so it can either be completely capitalized into rent, so $100 more rents, but then it would be completely indifferent for the tenant. Anything um, that they would benefit from in terms of higher productivity, they would pass through to the landlord. I don't think that's the case, but that's something that we're going to study also. Um, then that also leaves the medium and longer term impacts, right? Which, as we've shown or hoping to show in the third study, are equally important as the kind of the short term benefits of being sharper, being more productive, having better cognitive performance, all these things. So there is also a longer term benefit. And there it's really a game strategic consideration how the employee perceives that especially that they perceive that their employer looks after them and is interested in their health also longer term health, and that they are more willing to pay that back in terms of, for example, staying longer with the company, or the company might be able to attract better employees, more productive employees in the first place, and that can also then be part of what's capitalized. But I think, yeah, it really depends on the time horizon of that payoff and what part of it is kind of distributed among those stakeholder groups. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Looking at the different scales and sort of the
Yeah.
how those benefits are realized. Very, very interesting. And then one thing that we hear a lot from folks who are kind of thinking about how do I want to? I know I want to prioritize health. I'm not quite sure how to do it. I obviously have to deal with all the financials of building development, which is complicated. So building owners are often concerned about the upfront costs associated with health-focused improvements. And I'm curious if you are aware of or have done any research on any of the payback periods, and are there any low-hanging fruit interventions with particularly strong returns from that value and or health perspective, like looking at sort of the core of where we can derive value in a accessible way when it comes to really focusing on health and well-being, and what the different scales of that look like.
Yeah, that's not my primary focus of my research in terms of payback periods, but yeah, I've been involved in several projects and also publications. For a few months ago, we published a paper called the 10 questions on healthy buildings. Maybe we can also make that available. And some of those questions actually delve into payback periods as well. What I would say, and keeping in mind that I'm an academic, so I'm not in a position to give too much actionable advice and tell people what to do and how to do their job. I think they all know that themselves. But just some observations that I have being involved in these studies, and also reading a lot of studies in that field is. Um, what I said earlier, so synergies, for example, synergies between energy efficiency and health, and there is a large overlap. I think we shouldn't go as far as saying it's a 100% overlap. There are pinch points and trade-offs, and we should be aware of them, where the two don't go hand in hand, the sustainability and the green and the health. But to a large extent, there is overlap, and that's a low-hanging fruit, right? Because you're ticking lots of different boxes. So if you want to kind of prioritize which ones to go first, those would be the ones I think that are both sustainable and also have, so we could call them co-benefits in terms of health. And then other low-hanging fruits from ventilation control, indoor air quality, largely thermal comfort, lighting quality. There are lots of low-hanging fruits there that don't require really, and you could call them softer measures. I hate that term, but it's maybe it describes it reasonably well, as opposed to the harder kind of building fabric measures that require deep retrofits and really uh, making substantial changes to the layout of the building, the fabric of the building, building materials, and so forth, and are typically done as part of a larger retrofit or refurbishment package, which obviously give you a much larger effect in terms of health, but maybe not the first things that you would tackle usually.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point about the co-benefits and really looking at where are those areas where, based off of my unique context, the issues that I'm facing, that I can have the greatest impact based off of maybe just doing one intervention that's going to impact both sustainability and health and my bottom line, and really honing in on those areas. That is definitely an approach that we've seen be popular with our users and just with in our work developing frameworks, highlighting where those opportunities are. And then one other question, just more of a research focused question, is around the selection bias in your research. So one question that we get when we're talking about work like what you've published is it just true that newer buildings are healthier and better buildings are are healthier. How do we, or are healthy buildings just newer, nicer, and might perform better regardless? So, how do you separate out the impact of health features from other building quality features in your work?
Yes, and this is a question that really keeps us up at night as researchers. Is what we're actually finding, is it valid or is it just correlated with and explained by something else? So we're pretty confident that what we're measuring is not that they are newer buildings, better buildings, because we're controlling or keeping constant or keeping neutral a lot of these factors. So anything that's really readily observable and contained in databases, such as age, for example, location, certain architectural features, amenities, that's all kept neutral to make an apples to apples comparison. So that's not a worry. But I'd be amiss if I didn't admit that there are other factors that can't be observed, that are unobserved heterogeneity, as we call them, and that kind of may lead to a latent quality bias. So it's not 100%, but I don't think it's, I hope it's at a level where it would completely obliterate our results. Ideally, what we'd want would be a randomized control trial, right? Like we do in medical studies, where we just randomly pick buildings out of a hat and say, you are now undergoing healthy building certification, and you're not. And then we could see how would that play out in terms of the economic variables, how would rents develop before, during, and after this process. But yeah, that doesn't exist, at least not in a world where certification is voluntary.
And maybe one day it can. I know one thing that we're always, working with our users on is the importance too of benchmarking properties that might not make it through, get to that star rating. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that we definitely see the value in because understanding, obviously, from that research perspective, the value of bringing some of those maybe buildings that aren't quite at that 1 star, 2 star, 3 star rating for Fitwell into the fold to kind of show where the gaps are, see where the opportunities are, and then potentially be able to evaluate what the real impact is. So that makes a ton of sense. And then for my last question, before I jump into some from our users, for real estate leaders or investors who maybe are kind of skeptical about the ROI of healthy building investments, I'm curious what your pitch would be. Understanding too, obviously, that you're coming from the academic environment, but what are there any kind of key information, key data points that you have come across in your work that you think really drive home why you're passionate about this and why you think that there's value in the healthy building and sustainable building space?
Yeah. So what I would say, and again, keeping in mind that I'm an academic, I don't have a horse in this race, and if there wasn't a case to be made, then yeah, that would be equally fine with me. I'm in that lucky position as a tenured professor. Um, so, but a few things in terms of how to frame it is, first of all, through looking at healthy buildings through a risk lens. And I think that's part of the transmission channel actually between healthy buildings and healthy building certification and actual asset value. Um, and answering questions like, is my building in danger of becoming obsolete, both from a regulatory perspective. So what if more stringent requirements will come in, similar to what we've seen in terms of energy efficiency? I think there is a strong trend towards translating that into more stringent health standards as well. And then also not just complying with kind of the legal requirements, but going above and beyond that. And whether you want to kind of get pushed by the mainstream or whether you want to be at the forefront of a trend that is that is happening generally and where you can actually reap some economic benefits in terms of a healthy building business case. So if you look at it through a risk lens, then you also have things like obsolescence, regulatory. It might help the liquidity of your assets, so shorter selling periods, shorter lease up periods, less time on market. You should also actually see that in the cap rate of these increased cash flows. So if you have a lower risk building because it's future proof in terms of its health, then a lower cap rate is also quite a big lever in terms of asset value. So all these things I think are worth thinking about, not just in terms of is this actually going to give me X% more rent, as we try to show in the first study, but also in a forward-looking and in a risk perspective, mainly with regard to obsolescence and regulatory risk.
Yep, that's really helpful. And I think that risk mitigation perspective is something that we have really been honing in on as a core component of why this matters. We know that in both the short term and the long term, that these attributes really do um, have an impact when it comes to mitigating that risk. Obviously, I am less biased than Dr. First, but at the same time, I think that everything that we've seen coming out of the research and academic community has
Yeah.
helped
And
to,
one thing that I would add, sorry to interrupt, is
yeah, please.
also as for investors and especially institutional investors to take a portfolio perspective on this and looking at the portfolio, and not just looking at individual buildings, but looking at the entire portfolio and what kind of general risk your portfolio is carrying in terms of those risks. And yeah, almost like a mapping exercise of your portfolio and the health related risks there. Sorry, yeah, just
Awesome. No, that's great. That's great.
yeah.
And hopefully we can get to maybe two questions from our participants today. The first is a question around the evaluation of green certified buildings within your first study. If you could speak a little bit more to the findings there, any kind of hypotheses around maybe why that was a negative association, and kind of what went into that evaluation.
Okay, so our main hypothesis was and is that it's a timing issue of the study period that we looked at. That we had maybe in certain periods a lot of new certified green certified buildings being delivered to the market, and maybe at least in the short run, oversupply of green buildings in some markets, especially the 12 that we were looking at. And yeah, that's one possible explanation, but we want to look at it in more depth because it's still puzzling to us why what I've found in many studies previously all over the world, and I've
Yep.
been doing these green premium studies for a long time, well, all of a sudden the sign has flipped on this one. So I'm reserving my judgment, but it's interesting to see. If
Awesome.
any of the participants have any pointers as to why that might be, or maybe it's different from where you sit, then please let me know.
Perfect. And then one last question. So all of the factors mentioned by Professor First appear to have a common link, which is that a physiological impact on the human nervous system tied to healthy buildings. Um, Everyone should feel the strain on their energy within these spaces. Could this mean that in aggregate, the somatic load created by an urban place is a lead indicator of economic resilience? So, for example, do people linger in a public square, or does it drain them? Do they use one route over another, driving footfall and property demand based off of sort of the surroundings in the area within which they exist?
Yes, so I think there are some clear indications and also studies that confirm just that, based on essentially what are revealed preferences. So observing people, where do they linger? Where do they like to be, both within a building certain kind of spaces, and you can create heat maps of where people tend to cluster and where they spend more time, and where places that are spaces that they avoid. And that also goes for public spaces. And I think there is actually quite a long-standing line of research there. But I think where there is still work to be done is to actually link that to biomarkers and also, well, there have been some studies using fMRI, for example, how the brain reacts to certain environments, both urban and natural environments. And there is a lot of kind of feedback lessons that we can then feed back into urban design and building design. But yeah, definitely, it also speaks to urban resilience because when we talk about places where people want to be, and don't have to be necessarily, but want to be. And I think there is a trend towards that, that you can't twist people's arms into being at a certain place all the time. Then that goes a long way towards making cities more resilient, as we see at the moment.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I know just a local example of that is we've seen that with congestion pricing in New York and sort of the reduction in cars that has impacted the number of the pedestrian use of certain spaces or is starting to. Super interesting to sort of start to see some of that research come out. Thank you so much. We are at time, I think, right, only 1 minute beyond, so not too bad. And thank you so much, Dr. First, for joining us today and for all of our participants for tuning in. And if you have I know there are a couple of questions we didn't get to. We'll follow up via email for any of those responses as well. And thank you guys so much. Appreciate it and hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.